All right, so we are talking about limit setting tonight, and thinking about how we set limits, why we set limits, being able to reflect and be intentional before we set limits so that we feel better and confident and secure and good as parents, and that we're helping our kids to understand where limits may be and how important limits can be in these early ages to help kids feel safe, to help them feel secure, to help them learn what our boundaries are, all of which is so important as we think about development in general, but also really thinking about school readiness, thinking about all those pieces of social emotional learning that tie together. So last week, we talked a lot about how we work to teach skills to be able to prevent behaviors that might challenge us from happening. And so this week, we're focused more on okay, so what do we do if there is a behavior that feels challenging to us? If there's a place where we might want to be more intentional about setting limits. But before we get into the limits piece, it's always really important that when we're talking about behavior, that we are always making sure that we're starting with making sure that we are really clear on what our own expectations about behavior are for our kids and that they're really clear about what our expectations are for them as well. And so, what do I mean by that? I mean that if you are co parenting with a partner, if you have multiple people who might be involved in your child's life, like a grandparent or a close family friend or an aunt or uncle or cousins, right? Like whoever helps to parent your child, or if it's just you, really stopping and thinking as an adult, what's really important to me? What are sort of my expectations? And when we think about expectations, we're really thinking about that idea of general ways we want people to act in our family, right? So is safety extremely important to you? Is being polite really important to you? Is the idea of being kind super important, right? So you want to think about what are those expectations? What's kind of that moral fabric that feels really important to you, as well as for those others who might be helping to support parenting. And we also then, so once we sort of have this idea of our expectations, we have some examples here. Again, these are sort of like that general way, that bigger, we can kind of think of them of our morals or our belief system. Once we have those, we can start to think about what our family rules might be. And it's really important that we do think about what our family rules are and that we're able to state those really clearly for not only ourselves, but for our kids too. So if we're unclear about what our family rules are, our kids are going to be really unclear about what the rules are too. And we may see more behaviors because we don't have those expectations that are set. So again, an example of this might be something like if be safe is one of your expectations. Safety is really important for you and your family. This is one of the expectations that's really important for me and my family is being safe. For me, that means when we're in a parking lot, we hold hands. And sometimes my 3.5-year-old doesn't want to hold my hand, right? But that is one of my hard and fast rules. We are safe in this family, so we hold hands in the parking lot. We're safe in this family, so we use gentle hands with one another, right? We're safe in this family, so we don't scratch or poke or hit, right? So thinking about how
Natalie, we're
we
making food
link,
now. We'll be ready
again,
soon.
those rules with that expectation. And the expectation sort of serves as the why, right? And so we know young kids always want to know the why, but why? And so when we sort of are able to start to link our rules to these expectations, it becomes more clear. Why do we hold hands in the parking lot? So that we're safe, so that we stay safe. And we also know that, again, these rules can really help us to stay consistent with our limit setting. And they can help us if we have partners, if we have other family members who are helping us to parent, it can help us to stay consistent across lots of different environments too. And when we're consistent about how we set limits and when we set limits, that can really reduce power struggles because it's clearly laid out. We've previewed it, we've let kids know, we've reviewed it over and over, we've been able to share what these rules or expectations are. We've shared what happens if we don't follow through with a rule or expectation. And so once we've sort of done that previewing work, that can really, really help to reduce power struggles. That can help when we do set limits, for the limits, like for kids to be able to rebound faster after a limit is set, after they hear a no or a don't or a stop, or some of those things that can be upsetting. And like I said, limits are super helpful because they help us to feel contained. They help us to feel safe. They help us to feel secure. And for young kids, they're really looking for adults to say, can you keep me safe? Can you handle the emotion that I might be giving out in any given moment? And we want them to know, yes, we can. And sometimes that means we do that by setting a limit. So when we're thinking about those expectations, again, or our family rules, especially if we're working on specific skills, we can really reinforce those rules, and by giving that really good positive descriptive feedback. So one thing we're working on in my family right now is using kind words, and using sort of a kind tone of voice. And so anytime my son is using a kind word, or we notice he does that on his own, it's something that, again, we're working on, we're practicing a lot, then we give him a pom-pom and we put it in our kindness jar. And when our kindness jar is filled up, and he can give us pom-poms too, of, wow, that was really kind, I think you should get a pom-pom. We put it in our kindness jar, and then when it's filled up, we're going to have a popsicle party. That's sort of like our reward, right? But the idea is it's a really intentional way to recognize and notice when we're working on that skill, when we're working on a rule that might be harder, or a skill that feels really important. So these are just some examples of, if you have a couple of family rules, like we use kind voices, we share, we listen to directions, right? Like if those are some simple rules that you're working on with your kids, or as a family as a whole, you can think about how you might reinforce those. How do we recognize when it's happening? And this can really help us as adults and help kids to connect between, when we do this, having some type of acknowledgement or positive descriptive feedback that we're able to give. Okay, so let's talk about strategies for setting limits. So whenever we are setting limits, we really want to be on the lookout for patterns. And what that means is, maybe it is before bedtime and we feel like we give lots and lots of warnings. We feel like bedtime drags on forever and ever and ever. And it ends with us either setting a limit, or there being frustration, or maybe we get into sort of the bribing. If you go to sleep right now, then when you wake up, you can watch a show, right? Whatever that might look like. So there's lots of different patterns that we can fall into when it comes to behaviors that we might find that are challenging, or places where we find it difficult to set limits consistently. So our first step is to really reflect on that, think about that, and pick one to start with, one area to start with, or one rule that we might really want to be working on helping our children to understand or to follow through with. We also want to be thinking about this idea of leaning in and leaning out. So sometimes when we are setting limits as adults, we're feeling kind of frustrated, or we might be in our own emotional space, or we may be tired and it's not going as well as we'd like it to, or we're in one of those patterns, so it feels kind of difficult to set the limit consistently, or we feel like the limit isn't working. And so this is a space where we want to be thinking about, when do we need to lean in and offer ourselves as that really good co-regulator, that person where our child can inhale our calm, or we can use our relationship to help sort of wake up their system if they are more on the withdrawn side or sad side. So we want to be thinking about, when do we need to lean in, and that might look like, come here, you're having a really hard time, let me give you a hug, right? And that can be really hard to do, especially if it's something like your child has bit you or pushed you, or been screaming in your face. Sometimes our first instinct isn't to say, come here and let me hold you in close. Our instinct might be to say, that's a lot, I need space, or you need to take space, right? But we want to be thinking about, our child. And one of those times where actually bringing them in closer to us is going to help calm them down or help that behavior go away faster. And when are those times where we're saying, I think you need a little bit of space, or me as your parent needs a little space so that I can get back into a good regulated place so that I can be calm, so that I can be my best self and consistent as it relates to setting these limits. And then we want to think about if we're mixing limit setting strategies. And then I'm going to give you an example of a really simple acronym that you can use that can be really helpful. It's one that I use with my 3.5-year-olds, and it works. It does work if you use it consistently. So when we think about limit setting, again, that first piece is really that idea of previewing. We want to make sure we're really clear about what our behavior expectations are for our kids. And that might look different in different environments. So if we're out to eat, or we're at Target, or we're at the grocery store, our behavior expectations might look different than if we're at the park or we're in our home. If we're at someone else's home, the idea of how we expect our children to behave might look different than if they're in their own home. So we want to make sure we're really clear on that, and that we are letting kids know that we're previewing it with them. We're practicing that with them again when they're nice and calm, and that we're intentionally teaching them across the day what those expectations are. We really want to be thinking about the use of natural consequences. So an example of a natural consequence, I'll give an example that happened to me this morning. We're trying to get out the door. I had to be somewhere right at a certain time. So of course, the morning is going very slow because I have a time constraint. And my 3.5-year-old, as we're getting ready to walk out the door, takes a cup of tea and pours it on the floor. Why did he do that? I'm not really sure, right? Maybe because I was rushing. Maybe because I was saying, come on, come on, come on, let's go, let's go, let's go. Maybe because he's 3.5 and he was just curious. Whatever the reason was, I was frustrated, and I used, a louder voice, and I said, oh, this is, why would you do that? Why would you pour tea on the floor, right? Like super therapeutic, right? No, but we're real people here, so we can be real with each other. So, I'm frustrated. The tea's all over the floor. I'm also worried because it's hot. So now there's like, hot water coming towards his feet, and he only has socks on. He starts crying, my socks are wet. My socks are wet. So we're frustrated, right? And so it's a point where you have to sort of stop and say, okay, what are we going to do in this moment? I'm frustrated. He's crying. He's frustrated. He's feeling bad that he spilled this tea for no, real reason. And so the natural consequence was, you need to take some paper towels and you need to help clean this up, right? So I wiped up the hot tea with the paper towels, let him cool down a little, and his job was to throw them away in the trash. So the natural consequence was, you need to help pick up the spill that you created, right? So we want to be thinking about opportunities like that. If you destroy something, right? Like if you knock down your brother's tower or something like that, the natural consequence might be you need to help clean it up, or you need to help him rebuild it, or you need to check in with him. So we want to be thinking about what are those natural consequences as it relates to behaviors that we might see, or to our rules or expectations. Another natural consequence might be things like, if we are using, unkind words, then maybe we're saying, like, the bath toys go away. You're still going to take a bath, but the really fun toys we usually use, or the bath paint, or whatever that is, maybe we're not going to use that. So thinking about, like, what are those natural consequences and how are they connected to the behavior? We want whatever the consequences to be connected to the behavior. And so often we say, like, you're going to lose your iPad for a week, but we know for young kids at this age, it's really hard for them to hold that. And sometimes we need that break of that iPad time too. And so then we end up giving in, and then we're not being consistent with whatever the consequences. So we really want to be thinking about, for you and your child and your family and your cultural lifestyle, what makes sense? What are some of those natural consequences that are tied to rules and expectations? And how are we really clear in previewing those too? We want to be thinking about our tone of voice. We want to make sure that our voice can be firm, but we want it to be calm. So we don't want to be screaming or sort of flying off the handles ourselves. We can be firm and serious, but it can also be calm. We want to be really consistent with our warnings. So if we're saying, I'm going to give you 3 warnings, or I'm going to give you 2 more chances, and then whatever the natural consequences is going to happen, we want to make sure we're being consistent with that, that we're following through with that. Similarly, if we say, I'm going to give you 5 more minutes, we want to make sure that it's a true 5 minutes. So not like, oh, in 1 minute, we're going to say, okay, now it's time to clean up, or now we're done. Or in 20 minutes, we're going to say, okay, now it's done. We want to set a timer. We want to make sure that we're being really consistent with what we say. We want to watch out for this idea of sort of like funky patterning. And that's the idea of you say a no, or you set a limit, or you say, we're not doing that right now. And then they say, why, or the screaming or the crying or whatever happens, or just like the very, the deep sadness or the hanging on to you, or whatever it looks like when your child has a tough moment. And then you say, okay, fine, just this once we'll do it. Or, okay, I guess we can do it, right? So we started with a no and we moved to a yes. We want to try and avoid that. If we're starting with a no, we want to keep it a no. Okay, so if you say, we're not doing that right now, even if it's meaning that, you're kind of getting worn down, or you're like, oh, maybe I should have just said yes, we really want to stick and hold that limit through, and then learn from that. So we want to be careful when you're thinking about setting those. Want to take a second and think, is this really a no? Can I really follow through if it's going to be, a 20-minute issue or a 30-minute issue to calm down after I set this limit? If that's the case and you can't do it because maybe you're tired that day, or there's something else going on where it's not going to work, start with a yes. So start with a yes, say, sure, okay, we can do that. I know we don't normally do that, and today is a special day and we're going to say yes to that. So when we start with a yes, then we're not necessarily saying that this is going to happen all the time. It helps us to be more consistent so that when we do have to say a no or set that limit, we're able to be consistent and follow through. So no means no. So hopefully that makes sense. We can talk more about that if folks have questions around that. And then this is a big one. When we're setting limits, we want it to be 10 words or less, or 10 seconds or less. So as adults, oftentimes we do a lot of talking. We want to do a lot of explaining. We might have a lot of words that we're saying. We want to keep it short and sweet, 10 words or less, 10 seconds or less. And then this part is really, really important. After we set that limit, knowing that it might be upsetting for our child, we really want to think about, what does the repair look like when we're all done? So when we're doing this, and limit setting is by no means perfect. I know that I apologize to my child all the time by saying, like, I did use a loud voice. I'm really sorry I used a loud voice. I know you don't like it when I use a loud voice, and I'm working on that too. So being able to model apologizing or repair, or it might mean I followed through and I was really consistent as the parent setting that limit, and my child was really, really upset about that. So when they do calm down, or when they are more regulated, how do we remind them that I still love you no matter what? There's nothing that you could do that would make me not love you. I love you. You are a good person. You are so good. I know that, right? We want to make sure that we are letting them know that they're loved, that they're good, that they're learning, and everyone's learning, that we make mistakes sometimes, and that's okay. But the biggest piece is, for young children, we really want them to know, and they need to know after a hard moment happens, that you guys are okay. Your relationship is okay, that we're all good, whether it's the hugs or the kisses, or saying I love you, or saying that was really hard, and it's okay. We're still here together, right? So we want to be thinking about, what will that repair look like? What do you need as an adult to be able to be in that space where you can repair with your child? And then thinking about, what do they need, or what is sort of preferred way? Is it snuggles? Is it cuddles? Is it words? Is it doing something together, like playing, or an action together? So thinking about that repair piece is so important. So here's an example of what I'm talking about when we're thinking about setting limits. So one of the most effective ways to set limits, and a lot of times we miss this step, but this step is crucial. So if you take anything away from this little training, this is it. If you go in to set a limit with your child and you start by acknowledging how they're feeling or validating how they're feeling, that can be a game changer right there. So if we come in and we say, you are so angry right now, or you're so frustrated, or you're so disappointed, or you're scared, you don't want me to leave, you feel really scared. If we name how we think they're feeling and we validate that, right? So we're not saying like, like to me, I always say to my son, all feelings are okay. It's okay to feel really angry. It is okay to feel that way as long as we're feeling that way safely. So it's not okay to hit, or it's not okay to bite or scratch or push someone or knock their thing down or destroy something, right? That's not okay to do when you're angry, but it is okay to feel angry. And here are some things you can do. So the first thing we want to do is, again, really acknowledge that feeling. So we're going to go with the feeling angry right now, because I think a lot of kids sometimes have bigger pieces pop up when they are feeling angry or frustrated. So you're so angry right now. You're so frustrated right now. And that's it. We don't have to even say anything past that, but we're going to label that feeling, and we're going to make sure that we're down at their level and we're showing them that I see you and I understand how you're feeling. And then we're going to communicate the limit. You're so angry right now, but in this house, we use safe hands. That means we don't hit. So that's our limit. We use safe hands, we do not hit, right? Short and sweet. And then we can offer them an acceptable alternative. So sometimes that might mean we are able to offer them a choice. So that could be something like, if you feel like your hands really need to hit, you could hit a pillow. Or we might target another acceptable behavior, which might mean something like, when you can sit down on the floor or when you can sit down on the sofa, that tells me your body is calm and your listening ears are on. And then we just let them know that you're angry right now. We're safe in this house. When you can sit in this chair, that tells me that you're ready to have a conversation or that your body is ready to be safe. So we want to be thinking about, again, acknowledging that feeling, really communicating that brief limit, and then we can think about if we're able to offer them a choice or if we're going to give them something, a directive to do something really concrete. A lot of times we fall into this place where we might just say, just calm down. When you're calm and ready, you can come out, or we can move on, or we can do the next thing. But when you're really upset, it's hard to just calm down, first of all. And second of all, what does that even mean for like a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old? Oftentimes giving them something really specific to do. When you can put your hands in your pockets, or when you can come over here and help clean up the paper towel or the picture that you just ripped up, that's telling me that you're ready to sort of move forward. And so we are able to, again, follow through and hold through with that one directive, and then we can move forward after that. So here's some other tips for thinking about when we're setting limits in the moment. We want to be able to move close to our child. So we don't want to be sort of screaming it across the room. We want to get down on their level. We might need to call their name to get their attention, or tap them on the shoulder to get their attention, so that we can really make sure that they're cued in to what we're saying. We want to get eye contact and maintain that eye contact. And again, use that firm voice. So it's not a yelling voice, it's not an angry voice. But it's a firm voice. It's letting them know we're serious. It's letting them know, I understand you're really angry right now. We use safe hands. We're being safe in this house. So thinking about that piece, giving those really direct, simple, clear messages. And this is where making sure that we're thinking about that ahead of time, that we're practicing it, is huge. That can make a really big difference. And then making sure that we're prepared to back up our message with a limit if we don't get the response we're looking for. So if the behavior continues on and on, we're going to be really clear. We're going to hold that limit. We're going to say, this is not okay. Hitting is not okay. I might need to help you now with your arms to be safe, right? I might need to help hold your arms down to your side to be safe, right? And that doesn't mean we're hurting our child or we're doing anything like that, but we are literally letting them know, now I'm going to come in and I'm going to make sure that you're not hitting me, or you're not hitting your brother, or you're not hitting or destroying our property or whatever. I'm going to help you now, right? When you can sit down, or when you can say, mommy, I'm ready, like, again, giving a very clear directive, then I can let go of your hands. Then I know that your body's ready. So again, making sure that we're ready to back up that message. And then I have a few resources here if you are interested more in thinking about, again, those like how we set limits, how we are really helping to support our kids in the moment. So there's a few resources here. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to stop our recording so that if you have questions, we can go ahead for that.